Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. So now I will continue my report regarding on how to build clear learning targets. So there are many benefits based on the existence of learnings that are clear and usable in order to build clear learning targets. So number one is knowledge targets. So knowledge targets begin with words like know, list, name, identify, and recall. So sa knowledge targets, inaalam mo ang mga informations or details ng isang bagay. So kailangan mayroon kang information or understanding para magawa o malaman mo ang isang bagay. The procedural knowledge targets call for knowing how to do something. So, ang procedural knowledge targets, kailangan alam mo o naiintindihan mo kung paano gawin ang isang bagay. So, for example, we are using scientific notation para ma-determine o ma-represent ang mga malalaki at maliliit na numbers. So, another example is, for instance, kaya mong i-identify ang parts ng microscope. So, kaya mong i-identify yung parts ng microscope kasi nandoon yung knowledge mo. Alam mo yung informations at naiintindihan mo. So, number 2 is reasoning targets. So, reasoning targets deal with the skillful use or application of knowledge. So, itong targets na ito, or itong reasoning targets, it start out with mental processes like predict, infer, classify, hypothesize, compare, conclude, summarize, analyze, evaluate, and generalize. So, ang targets na ito ay nag-uumpisa sa mental processes. Say for instance, you are predicting or inferring something to solve problems. So reasoning targets is an ability to use knowledge and understanding para ma-figure out mo ang mga bagay-bagay and also to solve problems. So reasoning targets have 4 types. So may 4 types ang reasoning target. Letter A, inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning, it uses specific facts or evidence to infer general conclusions. So, gumagamit siya or nagsisimula ang inductive reasoning ng specific facts para ma-infer o ma-indicate o mabigyan ng support ang general conclusion ng isang statement. So say for instance, the chair in the living room is red. The chair in the dining room is red. The chair in the bedroom is red. Therefore, all the chairs in the house are red. So nandoon yung specific facts. So, ang specific doon is yung the chair in the living room is red. The chair in the dining room is red and the chair in the bedroom is red. So, therefore, ang conclusions doon or ang general conclusion ng statement na yon is all the chairs in that house are red. Lahat daw ng chairs sa house na yon is red. So, nandoon yung specific facts or evidence and nandoon rin yung general conclusions. So, letter B is deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning begins with a general rule or principle to infer specific conclusions or solutions. So, unlike sa inductive reasoning, nagsisimula siya sa specific. So ito namang deductive reasoning is nagsisimula sa general rule or principle to infer specific conclusions. So for example, all birds have feathers. All dove are birds. Therefore, dove have feathers. So ang general rule doon or principle is all birds have feathers. So di ba general siya. Then therefore, ang specific conclusions doon is dove have feathers. So di ba nandoon yung general rule to infer specific conclusions. So yun yung pagkakaiba ng inductive at ng deductive reasoning. So letter C, types of reasoning is analytical reasoning. Analytical reasoning requires examining components or structure of something. It is used in almost every discipline in identifying parts and describing relationship among them. So ang analytical reasoning means you are examining components of something. Ini-examine or ina-analyze mo ang isang bagay. Kung paano ba siya gawin o kung bakit siya ganun. So like for example sa mathematics, kapag sumasagot tayo, so ina-analyze muna natin, ini-examine muna natin kung bakit siya ganun or kung ano yung kailangan na gawin natin para masagot ang isang questions. So yun yung analytical reasoning. Ini-examine or ina-analyze muna natin ang isang bagay para malaman o matutunan kung ano ba yung dapat na isagot natin. So that is the analytical reasoning. So next is comparative reasoning. So comparative reasoning describes similarities and differences between two or more items. So itong comparative reasoning, for example, dinidescribe mo kung ano ba yung similarities or differences, for example, ng dalawang estudyante. So it is hindi dahil sa you are discriminating, but you are giving attention to that students kung ano ba yung similarities and differences nila para matulungan sila to learn something. So humahanap ka ng paraan to figure out or to found out kung ano ba yung makakatulong sa estudyante na yon. So hinahanap mo or kino-compare mo yung similarities at differences nila to help them. So next learning targets is performance skills targets. Performance skills targets require the students to demonstrate their mastery of a learning target and to be observed. So, sa performance skills targets require sa mga students na ipakita o demonstrate kung ano ang mga natutunan o nalaman nila. Kasi doon malalaman kung okay ba ang performance or learning na nag-gathered ng mga estudyante. And also to be observed, dapat ino-observe. So, the example of performance skills targets include read aloud with fluency. So, dito na makikita yung performance skills ng mga estudyante. So, sa pamamagitan ng read aloud with fluency na activity, doon mo makikita kung paano nila i-demonstrate ang mastery learnings nila. Kung sila ba ay maayos or okay na ba yung performance na nag-gathered nila or learning na natutunan nila. And another example, so physical education is ipapademonstrate sa mga students kung paano gawin ng trapping, dribbling of ball sa basketball. And another example or sa volleyball, ide-demonstrate ng mga students or ng mga bata kung paano mag-serve ng ball or kung paano paluin ang isang bola. So, kasi ang tinitingnan sa performance skills is yung performance nila, kung paano nila natutunan ang learnings ng tinuro ng isang teacher. Number 4 is product targets. So product targets are not used as frequently as other types, but are highly valued, calling for creation of a product. So it is about creation of a product. So ang product targets, hindi naman daw siya madalas na ginagamit or required kaysa sa ibang types of learning targets. Pero it is highly valued because product target is a creation of a product. So ito ang focus ng learning targets, to create a product. So for example, sa arts, makaka-create ka ng drawings or paintings that demonstrate one and two perspectives. Or sa mathematics naman, makaka-create ka ng tables or graphs to display paper about sa topic na gusto mo. So, nakakagawa ka o nakaka-create ka ng product mo. So, that is the product targets. So, number 5 is dispositional target. Dispositional target rarely show up on state standards but are important because they reflect students' attitudes about school and learning. So dispositional target is also an important in learning targets kasi dito nare-reflect o makikita ang attitudes, interest or motivation ng mga students about their school and of course sa learnings nila. So for example is, binibigyan ng bata o estudyante ng value o halaga ang mga learnings sa school or inside their classroom. Pinapakita niya o nila ang willingness nila to learn and participate in every task or activities. And see mathematics as an important to learn, for example. So that was the some example of dispositional targets. So next is establishing learning targets. So establishing learning targets, it is a very general statements describing what students will learn, ano ba yung kailangang matutunan ng estudyante, at ano ba yung kailangang gawin ng mga students by the end of the class. So, ano ba yung targets mo as a teacher sa mga estudyante mo na matutunan nila by the end of the class? So, establishing learning targets or in educational goals, it begin with an I can statement. So, in mathematics example, students will learn to use mathematics to define and solve problems. Number 2, students will develop number sense. Students will develop geometric sense. And students will learn the fundamental concepts of measurement. So, natututo ang mga estudyante to use mathematics to define and to solve problems. Nade-develop ang bata o estudyante when it comes in number sense and geometric sense. At natututunan rin ng mga bata ang mga fundamental concepts ng measurement. So natututo sila kung paano mag-measure. So that is the some example of mathematics when it comes in educational goals in establishing learning targets. In science examples, Number 1, students will learn to apply scientific research methods to investigate research questions. Number 2, students will develop the abilities to do scientific inquiry. And number 3, students will learn to recognize the interconnections within and among systems. So, sa science examples naman, natututo ang mga students na gamitin or i-apply ang scientific research method o step-by-step process para malaman nila ang mga kasagutan sa mga questions nila by investigating. Nade-develop na rin ang mga kakayahan nila to do scientific inquiry at nalalaman o natututunan rin ng mga students kung paano ma-recognize ang mga interconnections na within and among the systems. So, in language arts examples, number 1, students will learn to think critically about the effectiveness of written text. Number 2 is students will learn to write in a variety of forms for different audiences and purposes. So, number 3 is students will learn to use different skills and strategies for reading. So, natututo ang mga students to think critically about the effectiveness of written text. Natututo rin silang magsulat or gumawa ng iba't ibang forms for different audiences and purposes. So, kumbaga, nagkakaroon sila ng ideas in different aspects of audiences and its purposes. And students will learn to use different skills and strategies for reading. So that was the example of when it comes in language arts. So next is educational learning objectives. These are more specific statements of what students will know and able to do. Typically, they are written to cover a small block of instructional time, such as an instructional unit. They should be stated in terms of specific, observable, and measurable students' responses. Always think about what specific things you want students to learn in relation to your goal. So, educational learning objectives, ito naman yung it is more on specific statements. Kung ano ba yung kailangang matutunan o kailangang gawin ng mga students in relation sa goal mo as a teacher. And ano yung objectives mo na kailangang matutunan ng mga estudyante mo. So, learning objectives are not activities that students will engage in. Hindi yung mga activities na nai-engage yung mga students or material students will see or use. So, for educational learning objectives, for example in mathematics, your goal, number 1 is students will learn to use mathematics to define and solve problems. So, ang mga objectives mo ay number 1, students will learn to identify questions to be answered in real world situations. So number 2 is students will learn to apply a variety of strategies to investigate problems. Number 3 objective, students will learn to identify relevant information in a problem situation. And number 4 objective, students will learn to recognize the need to abandon or modify an unproductive approach to a solution. So, the goal number 2 in mathematics example, your goal is to students will develop number sense. So, ang objective mo dito is the following. Number 1, students will learn to compute. So, natututo yung mga bata kung paano mag-compute. For example, kung paano gawin ng addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division using whole numbers. So number 2 objective, students will learn when estimation is a better approach than computation. So number 3 objective, students will learn to use estimation to check the reasonableness of their answers. So number 4 objective is students will learn the meaning of basic operations and how to apply basic operations to situations involving whole numbers. So, natututo or natututunan ng mga estudyante kung ano ba yung meaning ng mga operations or basic operations. And, of course, kung paano ito i-apply, kung paano ito gawin, kung paano gawin yung mga basic operations to situations na involve ang whole number. So that would be my report, hoping for your understanding, and thank you very much for your time to listen. And again, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and thank you to our instructor, Ma'am Darwisa. Thank you po, and to all of you.